Alright, welcome back to the AR-15 barrel series. Today's episode features something pretty special, a custom-built upper from Compass Lake Engineering that was generously loaned out by a local subscriber. Now, this upper does have a pin and welded muzzle device, so there will be a couple small deviations from my normal testing procedure, but I still think we're going to get some useful data out of this. Also, stick around until the end of the video. I'll be sharing an update on standardized ammo for the series, which quite a few of you have been asking about. So again, this is a complete upper loaned to the channel by a local subscriber. Huge thanks to him. The upper was built by Compass Lake Engineering, which I'll be referring to as CLE. And while I've heard of CLE before, I'll admit that I wasn't super familiar with them prior to this. After digging in, I found that they've been around for 30 to 40 years and earned their reputation primarily in the high power and service rifle disciplines. They also have a history of collaboration with the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit, along with many other military contracts. As of 2024, CLE unfortunately closed its doors to the public due to rising business costs and is now focusing on contract fulfillment. This particular barrel was built in October of 2023 and came as part of a fully assembled upper direct from CLE. The owner of the upper hasn't disassembled it beyond removing the handguard, but I was given permission by the owner to disassemble the upper further to get a closer look at things. But this was done after shooting the groups, so that I was able to shoot the upper as it was originally assembled. It's got around 3,500 rounds on it and sees regular use in tactical games competitions as well as accurized AR matches. The owner is more of a practical shooter than a collector, so maintenance hasn't been meticulous, but the barrel does get cleaned every now and again. Starting up front, the upper features a CLE marked M-LOK free float handguard. I'm pretty sure CLE isn't the actual OEM for this. If you know who makes it, you can drop it in the comments below. The handguard attaches to a beefy steel barrel nut, and the upper itself is a standard mil-spec profile with an A4G mark. The bolt carrier group appears unmarked, at least there's no manufacturing stamps that I can identify. It's phosphate coated externally with a chrome lined bore, and the cam pin has been swapped out by the owner for one from Ford Controls design. Gas system is mid-length using a low-profile gas block and stainless steel gas tube. The barrel is 14.5 inches, made from a Bartlein blank with a bead blasted finish, and a FCD muzzle device has been pinned and welded to bring it to a non-NFA length. The gas port measures in at 78 thousandths, which is a pretty reasonable size. The gas block journal is 750 thousandths and has dual dimples to lock down both gas block set screws. The gas block journal is half bead blasted. I think that's to help with fitment. I would call it a light interference fit, which should make for a good gas seal. The barrel is made from 416R stainless steel and has a 1 to 7.7 twist and features CLE's proprietary custom chamber. CLE places a lot of emphasis on this chamber design, claiming it improves bullet jump and lead angle geometry and is specifically tailored for modern high BC bullets. According to CLE, this results in up to 23% smaller group size when shooting magazine-fed ammo. Barrel extension machining looks great with well-formed feed ramps and what looks like to be a very consistent bead blasted finish at the rear face. And overall, I would say that everything looks good with no concerns for me. Alright, next we'll get this thing up on the bench and take a closer look. Alright, let's get started by taking a quick look at the bolt carrier group. Now, technically, I should be using minus gauges for this, but I only have plus gauges on hand, so we're just going to roll with it. Anyway, the bolt shoulder bore accepts a 0.531 inch plus gauge, and the bolt shoulder itself measures in at 0.52735, which gives us about 3.7 thousandths of clearance. The bolt tail bore took a .251 plus gauge, and the bolt tail itself measured in at 0.24925, leaving us with about 1.8 thousandths of clearance. Moving on to the upper receiver, this one required a little bit of heat to remove the barrel. And after removal, when the parts are cold, they wouldn't easily fit back together, so there is a bit of a heat fit between the two. The main bore of the upper wouldn't accept a 1 inch minus gauge, but did accept a .998 minus gauge. And comparing that to the barrel extension, I measured it at 0.99935 inches, which is on the larger side of barrel extensions that I measured so far. So, combined with the undersized upper receiver bore, there appears to be a light interference fit between the two that requires a little bit of heat to mate the two together. I also measured the gas block journal, which came in at about 3.5 thousandths oversized, and the fit with the gas block was extremely snug, which should translate to a great gas seal. Next, we'll check on how the barrel is holding up after approximately 3,500 rounds. Starting with the throat erosion gauge, it doesn't even make it to a 2, which is a very good sign for barrel life. Using a 223 go gauge with a new JP bolt, the bolt locks up just fine. With a 223 no-go gauge, the bolt does not close, confirming that the headspace is still pretty tight. And just for fun, I tried a 223 wild function gauge, but since this is a CLE custom spec chamber, that gauge just doesn't fit as expected. Now let's jump over to the bore scope and take a peek inside. I gave the barrel a good cleaning beforehand. Not a deep scrub, but enough to get a decent look at things. Since it's a loaner, I didn't want to get too aggressive. Anyway, we're starting out at the chamber and working our way towards a muzzle. The chamber walls look nice and smooth. I don't see anything unexpected here. And as we move our way up towards the throat, you can see a bit of carbon here, right where the case mouth ends. And moving into the throat, there is some visible fire cracking, which is expected with a few thousand rounds down the pipe. We'll take a little bit of a spin around here so you can get a good look at things and see how this barrel is holding up so far. Moving up to the gas port, it shows a bit of erosion towards the muzzle side, which is totally normal, and this looks like a reasonable amount of erosion for about 3,500 rounds. The rifling past the gas port looks consistent. We'll do a quick spin around to get a better look, and everything looks fine to me. I don't see anything concerning, but you guys can let me know in the comments if you feel differently. And moving to the crown, everything looks good to me. There's a little bit of lint or cotton visible, but don't pay attention to that. The crown itself looks to be in fine shape to me. And finally, looking in from the muzzle, you'll notice a decent amount of carbon buildup around the crown. That's pretty common with an AR-15 that has a muzzle device on it and a few rounds through it. Obviously, with a pin and welded muzzle device, there isn't really a good way to get in there to clean this area that I know of, so it is what it is. But let me know what you guys think in the comments if you think that carbon buildup could affect the groups. I don't think it'll be a major factor, but either way, we'll get more information when we hit the range. And speaking of, we'll go over the shooting setup real quick and then get to the groups. The upper was shot as it came assembled from CLE. The handguard was fitted with a 3-inch front bag rider. The stock was supported by a rear bag. An A5 buffer system was used with an A5-0 buffer and Sprinco green spring. Trigger is a Geisley Super Dynamic 3-gun trigger. The bore was fouled with a few rounds prior to shooting the first group. Scope is a Vortex Viper 6.5 to 20 by 44 with rings torqued to 15 inch-pounds. Magnification was set to 20, and parallax was set using a head nod test. A Garmin 0C1 chronograph, as provided by Ballistic X, was used to collect velocity data. A Mantis X10 Elite was mounted to the front of the handguard to keep track of rifle stability and detect any possible shooter-induced flyers. Groups were measured using the Ballistic X app. Each group is 30 shots fired consecutively over about 4 minutes. This simulates a match or practical type setting where the barrel will get some heat into it. Between each group, I will use a chamber chiller and leaf blower to cool down. The shooting distance is 100 yards. Point of aim was a small circle at the bottom of the target. Point of impact was a few inches higher to preserve the aiming point. Wind was monitored with ribbon, and each 30-shot group took about 4 minutes to shoot and will be edited down to about 15 seconds. Alright, I'll be shooting 4 groups today. For the first group, I'll be shooting PMC X-Tac 55 grain M193. Next, we have Hornady 73 grain ELD match. After that, we have the new standardized load, which will be IMI Razor Core with a 77 grain Sierra Match King bullet. And I'll be shooting a 4th load today, which will be the 223 load of the Black Hill 77 grain, which is different from the Mark 262 load. So we'll see how this load ends up doing. Alright, let's do it. Okay, starting off with the cheap stuff, some PMC X-Tac M193. I like to start out with an FMJ load for the first group of the day, just to get any jitters out and also to get warmed up. But anyway, the shooting felt fine on my end. Injection looked fine. It started off near 3 o'clock for a few rounds and then shifted back to about 4 o'clock for the rest of the group. Wind was pretty calm. The Garmin collected chrono data on every shot, and the Mantis only missed 1 shot. So we will finish up the group and then take a closer look. Okay, the PMC X-Tac 55 grain M193 has an advertised velocity of 3,120 feet per second out of a 20-inch barrel, and we got 2,905 feet per second out of this 14.5-inch barrel, which gives us 1,030 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, which isn't too bad, but the standard deviation was a bit high at 37 feet per second. The velocity extreme spread was also a bit high at 161 feet per second, with the slowest shot being shot number 2 and the fastest shot was shot number 22. Rifle stability looked good with an average score of 99.7. The lowest score was 99.2, which I'm not concerned about. And we ended up with a group that is quite a bit taller than it is wide, which I prefer to see the groups when they're a little bit more circular than this, but this is what we got. Group size ended up at 3.759 MOA with a mean radius of 0.952 MOA. And if you're new here, I'll introduce you to the AZ score real quick. So the AZ stands for A-Zone Equivalence Distance, and it's just a pretty quick and easy calculation to come up with the farthest distance that the calculated group size would still fit into a USPSA A-Zone. The reason why I came up with this number is it's just an easier number for me to look at and make sense of instead of looking at the raw main radius numbers. Anyway, moving on to the low tier ammo leaderboard. The CLE Bartlein comes in a bit lower than I would have expected at 9th place out of 16 on this board, with an AZ score of 148 yards compared to the Hodge in 1st place on this board with an AZ score of 214 yards. So, not a commanding start from the CLE Bartlein, but we'll see how it goes for the next group. Second group of the day was Hornady 73 grain ELD match. I've had pretty good luck with this load. It usually shoots pretty good for me. It seems to be loaded a little bit lighter, so the velocities are a little bit lower than what I would expect. Anyway, ejection looked pretty consistent around 4 o'clock to 4:30. Wind was pretty calm without any significant gust or anything. Both the Garmin and Mantis collected data for all 30 shots, which is nice, and all the shooting felt fine on my end. So, we will finish up the group and then take a closer look. Okay, so the Hornady 7.3 grain ELD match has an advertised velocity of 2,790 feet per second out of a 24-inch barrel, and I got 2,488 feet per second out of this 14.5, which results in 1,003 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, which is just a little bit on the lower side for a 14.5, but not too bad. And the standard deviation was a little bit on the higher side at 23 feet per second. The velocity extreme spread was 92 feet per second, with shot 3 being the slowest and shot 26 being the fastest. Rifle stability looked fine with an average of 99.6 and the worst shots at 99.2, which is good enough for me. Looking at the group, we had a pretty nice looking cluster with some of the earlier shots, 1, 2, and 4 squirting out of the group. Nothing looks weird on the data with those shots, and they all felt fine on my end, so it is what it is. And we still ended up with a really good looking group. The group size came in at 1.528 MOA with a mean radius of 0.357 MOA. And for those of you who are curious, if we remove the two worst flyers of the group would shrink to 1.205 MOA with a mean radius of 0.318 MOA. And if we plug that into our leaderboard for premium tier ammo, the CLE Bartlein comes in third place with an AZ score of 395 yards. And that falls behind two groups from the Sons of Liberty Gunworks SPR barrel. If you wanted to throw out the flyers with the CLE, it would get bumped up to second place and just barely beat out the Sons of Liberty barrel with the Burgers, but it would still be behind the Sons barrel with the Hornady ELDs. Also keep in mind that the CLE has 3,500 rounds through it, and the SPR was brand new when I shot these groups. And also the CLE has a pinned and welded muzzle device where I shot the Sons of Liberty SPR with no muzzle device. So the round count and muzzle device may or may not have played a factor. And you can let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Anyway, let's move on to the next group. Okay, so here is the new standardized load for the channel, which is IMI 77 grain Razor Core. The plan is to have a consistent ammo with every barrel moving forward, with a few small caveats, but I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. Anyway, the shooting felt fine on my end, with none of the shots feeling significantly off. Ejection looked pretty consistent at around 3 o'clock, and the Garmin and Mantis captured data for every shot. So we will finish up the group and then take a closer look. Okay, so the IMI has an advertised velocity of 2,750 feet per second out of a 20-inch barrel, and we got 2,589 feet per second out of this 14.5-inch barrel, which gives us 1,146 pound-feet of energy, which is a bit on the warmer side of things, and the standard deviation was a little bit high at 25 feet per second. The velocity extreme spread was 123 feet per second, with shot 30 being the slowest and shot 5 being the fastest. Rifle stability looked fine with an average score of 99.6 and a low score of 99.1. The group looks okay, maybe a little spotty with shots 5 and 22 being the farthest away from the center, I think. Anyway, we ended up with a group size at 2.230 MOA and a mean radius of 0.539 MOA. And if you're curious, if we pull shots 5 and 20 from the group size would change to 1.926 MOA with a mean radius of 0.480 MOA. Okay, so I don't have a whole lot of barrels that have shot the IMI Razor Core so far. The only other one has been the Noveske Rival. So for this comparison, we are comparing against all the barrels that have shot a load with a 77 grain Series Magic King bullet. This doesn't make all the ammo exactly equal, but it's about as fair as a comparison as I can make with what I got. Anyway, the CLE comes in third with an AZ score of 262 yards, which is just a little bit behind the Geisley that had an AZ score of 277 yards. And the Noveske, which shot the same IMI Razor Core ammo, came in sixth place with an AZ score of 236 yards. So this is a pretty decent performance by the CLE Bartlein, and let's see what it can do with the last group. Alright, so this is the 77 grain Black Hills, and this is their 223 load, which is quite a bit different than their Mark 262 load, which is basically impossible to find right now. Or if you can find it, it's way overpriced. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. We had our first oopsie on camera with this group. On shot 23, my grip was not quite as stable as it should have been, and I ended up accidentally bump firing shot number 24. So, you'll notice a flyer high up on the target, and that's what that's from. Other than that, things went pretty smooth. The rest of the shots felt fine on my end. So, we will finish up the group and then take a closer look. Alright, the Black Hills has an advertised velocity of 2750 out of a 24-inch barrel, and we got 2437 with 1,015 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. And the velocity SD was okay to a little bit high at 24 feet per second. Extreme spread of the velocity was 114 feet per second, with shot 27 being the slowest velocity and shot 31 getting the highest velocity. Rifle stability looked fine with an average stability score of 99.6 and the worst shot at 98.9, which was shot 22, which didn't land too far away from the center of the group. And we're just going to go ahead and ignore shot number 24 at the top there, since it is the accidental double. I think that makes it the first official flyer that I'm going to ignore for the channel, so that's pretty interesting. Anyway, the group looks pretty decent. I don't think I would really call this group round, but I don't think I would say anything looks really off about it either. So anyway, the group size for the 30-shot group is 1.879 MOA with a mean radius of 0.574 MOA. And if we return to the 77 grain Series Match King factory ammo leaderboard, this group came in 5th place, just a little bit behind the Hodge and a little bit farther behind the IMI group that we shot just before this. Okay, so let's take a brief look at how all the groups from the CLE compare to each other. So the Hornady 73 grain ELD match had the best group with an AZ score of 395 yards. Then the IMI and Black Hills were fairly close to each other with an AZ scores of 262 yards and 246 yards, with the PMC X-Tac M193 loads unsurprisingly coming in last place with an AZ score of 148 yards. The velocity SDs for the heavier grain loads were all pretty similar, between 23 and 24 feet per second, and the IMI Razor Core had the most muzzle energy at 1,146 foot-pounds, with the rest coming in at just over 1,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. Alright, moving on to the overall best group leaderboard. The CLE Bartlein Upper comes in with a solid 2nd place finish out of our total of 16 barrels currently on the leaderboard. It's still trailing behind the Sons of Liberty Gunworks SPR barrel by a noticeable margin, but it holds a comfortable lead over the White Oak Armament. Now, of course, I'm not a perfect shooter, so there's a good chance that all these groups could tighten up at least a little bit with better shooting fundamentals or just on a different day. Also, just because a certain barrel performed a certain way here doesn't necessarily mean that your copy of the same barrel will shoot exactly the same. There's always going to be some barrel-to-barrel variation, and while I do my best to control all the variables that I can, there are still going to be a few things that are going to be tough to lock down 100% of the time. So, just a few things to keep in mind when looking at these results. Anyway, here's a side-by-side comparison of the top 3 groups on the leaderboard. All of these groups were shot using the Hornady 73 grain ELD match load, which at this point is clearly proven to be a strong performer across a wide range of barrels. And speaking of ammo, let's take a few minutes to talk about standardizing the test loads going forward. Okay, so there may be one or two of you, or maybe a few more, who have asked for a little bit more consistency in the ammo that I use for the AR-15 barrel series, and honestly I don't have a great excuse for not doing this sooner. The best reason that I can come up with is that I wasn't quite sure what ammo made the most sense to stick with, and I kind of wanted to see how things played out before committing. But after thinking it over, I came up with a few criteria that helped me narrow it down. First, I wanted to use something that I'm already familiar with, because why not? Second, I wanted something that's fairly popular and widely available, so that other folks could relate to the results. And third, I didn't want anything too proprietary, just in case I ever need to switch loads later on. So, with that in mind, I settled on the IMI 77 grain Razor Core as the primary standardized load. It uses a 77 grain Series Match King bullet, which I've used a lot in multi-gun. I'll shoot 69 grain SMKs occasionally, but for longer range stuff, I usually default to 77s. And the 77 grain SMK is just really a popular projectile. Just about every ammo manufacturer that I can think of that makes 223 or 556 has some variation of a load that uses this bullet. It's basically everywhere. Originally, I was leaning toward the Federal Gold Medal 77 grain SMK, but when I went to buy it, I couldn't find any retailer that had more than 200 rounds in stock, and all of them were priced higher than what I usually pay for that load. So I went with the IMI Razor Core instead, since it was available at quantity, the price was decent, and it checked all the boxes. So here we are. I should mention, I had already filmed a few different barrels using a different lot of Razor Core before deciding to standardize with it. So there will be 2 different lots floating around in the data for a little while, but it is what it is. The second standardized load I'll be using is Winchester M193, and the same kind of reasoning here. I've shot a ton of 55 grain FMJ over the years, and M193 is just one of those classic, widely available loads. Tons of manufacturers make some variant of it, so even if I ever need to switch brands down the road, there are plenty of comparable options out there. So, IMI 77 grain Razor Core and Winchester M193 are the 2 you'll be seeing a lot more of. Now, I have already filmed a few barrels before deciding to standardize the ammo, so I might go back and reshoot those with the new standards, or I just might leave them as is. As of right now, I believe every barrel waiting in the edit queue has shot the IMI Razor Core, and very few, if any, have shot the Winchester M193 yet. So I might go back to shoot the M193 through those barrels, but that's going to take some time, so we'll just have to see how it goes. You're also still going to see some non-standard loads pop up here and there for a while, just because I have a good bit of ammo left over that I want to burn through. But as the channel grows and I'm able to secure larger lots of ammo, I'll be able to tighten things up and really dial in the consistency. So if there's another load you'd like to see added to the rotation, let me know in the comments, and I'll keep that in mind the next time I make a big purchase. Now, the Hornady 73 grain ELD match is clearly pulling some strong numbers. It's holding the top 3 spots for the best group leaderboard right now. I won't be adding it to the standard list, but you'll probably be seeing me shoot a little bit more of it. So you can let me know what you think. And finally, if you want to help support the channel and make this kind of testing easier, I've opened up the YouTube memberships, and I also have a Patreon page if you prefer that route. The main perk right now is that I will prioritize messages and questions from members and patrons. I'll still do my best to respond to video comments and DMs, but paid supporters will get priority. Of course, if you're not in the position to do either one of those, no problem. Liking, commenting, and subscribing all help a ton and are definitely appreciated. And I think that's going to wrap it up for today. I'll see you next time. Later.